Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mindful Moods and Mental Grooves, an educational wellness experience focusing on mental health and well-being. On this episode, I'm joined by Kenny Tong. Kenny is an outpatient therapist for the Children's Service Center in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. He has been in the field for 11 years and is certified in trauma, safe space, mindfulness, DBT, and EMDR. Kenny is also a licensed professional counselor and has a master's in clinical mental health counseling. Kenny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I think when we first started, before I started the podcast, I just wanted to talk with you a little bit. And I think the focus for this podcast was talking about the LGBTQ community and bringing a little bit of education, a little bit of information, and hopefully to remove some stigmas that people might have for our viewers or our listeners. So first question that I want to start with, what is the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity?
So that's one of the most common questions asked.
Is it? Okay.
So because you always think like sexuality and gender, they're the same thing, but realistically speaking, they're not. So I prefer not saying sexual orientation.
Okay.
Love my mentor, Dr. Paul Dottie. He was the one that definitely just put me in this path of doing sexuality and gender-based focused therapy.
Okay.
We prefer to use the term affectional orientation.
Oh, okay.
The reason why we don't use sexual, because relationships are not just about that
Of
sexual
course.
attraction. Like, we need to talk about physical attraction, emotional attraction, romantic attraction. So he and I use the term affectional, and we're trying to help others
I like
switch
that.
that language.
Yeah.
But by definition, affectional orientation has to do with the attraction to someone and or something else. So we try to keep it as broad as possible, but the basic concept is we're talking about what kind of connections we're looking for within ourselves as well as with everyone else around us. Now, gender, on the other hand, while it does play into how we perceive others and things like that, gender is more personal. Gender is more about that whole self-identity and like
Okay.
who we are. You'll hear me say the word autonomy a lot. So the sense of self, the sense of who we are, that's what gender is all about.
Okay.
What kind of autonomous thoughts, feelings, belief, behaviors I have about who I am.
That's a beautiful description and a way to separate the two. I appreciate that answer. Thank
Yeah.
you. Moving into the next question, do you see more or less acceptance of LGBTQ in society?
So that's a wonderful question. So let me give a little background.
Sure.
I came out when I was 13 or 12. So essentially, when we talk about coming out, it's a personal journey. To me, a coming out process, while it traditionally talks about like, how someone comes out to others, I take it more in stages.
Okay.
I talk more about like, what is that personal journey you do with yourself first before you expressively, outwardly tell others and how you want to do that. So my journey started back at like 12 or 13. I was in high school right around that time period. Wonderful time in my life, not really. But it actually started right when I decided to do a research project. So in high school, I had the opportunity to do a research study at college level, presented at different science symposiums, things like that.
That's awesome.
My topic was gender nonconformity. So the concept of how our biological sex and our behaviors do not match to what we generally stereotypically think about when it comes to gender and sexuality.
Okay.
And how did that affect our self-perceived rejection sensitivity? So specifically for gay men, young gay men between the ages of 18 to 27, I think was my population, we looked at how that tied into their personal identify feelings of, am I going to be accepted? Am I not going to be accepted? Am I going to be great? Now, during that time, I think is when we started going through a transition. It started with, in my time, it was LGB, and then we just started transitioning and incorporating the word T into it.
Okay.
So people were getting more and more okay with the concept of affectional orientation. But then when it came to like changes of gender and the incongruencies of like how my biological sex is, but it's not matching to how I feel my gender is, that was kind of still a huge taboo kind of thing.
Okay.
It wasn't until probably my second or third year of undergrad when I started to see shifts in our community where the T started becoming more of an acceptance thing. It's because before it was if you're either gay, you're a lesbian, a little questionable in the bisexual piece. Like there was a lot of stigma with bisexuality.
Okay.
But the community as a whole, historically, it was you're either gay, you're lesbian, you're bisexual. We would never include anyone who's transgender. That's a
Right.
huge taboo.
Yeah.
Cross dressing, ironically enough, does fall under the umbrella of transgender, but that was accepted. But we couldn't accept the fact that someone's gender could be different.
Yeah.
Performance versus, self autonomy and
That's
self expression. Cross dressers are doing it because they are trying to express themselves and provide entertainment. But now we've evolved to it's not just about entertainment, it's about lifestyles.
Sure.
Terminologies have changed. Like we don't use the term cross-dresser that much. We definitely don't use the word transsexual anymore. Like that's a huge no. We don't say that. But we definitely incorporated more transgender. I've been here with Children's Service Center going on 2.5, 3 years. And I just find it interesting that our teenager population, so those between the ages of 12 to, we'll say, 16, 17 years old,
Okay.
they're more open and more expressive when it comes to gender. Whereas when I was around that time, in my time coming out,
When you were around that age.
around that age, yeah, it was more about like who you were attracted to. Like we never really talked about gender. It was never really
Sure.
a thing. Now all of a sudden there's a shift away from talking about relationships, talking about like who you're attracted to, and there's now like almost this gigantic magnify on gender, who we are, self-expression, self-identity. It's a very interesting shift lately.
It's really kind of so what basically from in summary from what I've gathered, what you're saying is like you've seen not just so much a shift in I guess a more positive direction, but also a shift in a more acceptance within the community.
So I think it's important to talk about the differences between externalized homophobia and internalized homophobia. There's a huge disconnect there, and most people don't realize that this exists. More so, though, like who are not identifying within the LGBTQIA plus umbrella.
Okay.
But there is a massive internalized homophobia. There's this conception of like gay men don't like lesbians, lesbians don't like gay men.
Yeah.
There's always been this talk of if you're bisexual, are you considered confused? Bisexuality is its own respectful attraction form. You
Sure.
can't have that.
Yeah.
But then, like, let's fast forward a little bit, right? Now we have terms like non binary. There are some individuals in the trans community who believe that non binary is not part of the trans community. Granted, we're talking very few numbers, but it does exist.
Yeah.
There's even the question of pansexuality. Is someone who's pansexual, so they don't look at the person based off their gender and the binary thinking of male or female. Their whole thing is, I'm attracted because you're a person. There's more to that.
Right.
Some people to this day still think, well, isn't that just bisexuality? Aren't they the same thing? But
Right.
they're really not.
Yeah.
So what I like to say is we just love complicating things. there's no right or wrong answer. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, and that's what it really seems like. There is no right or wrong. It's just, acceptance, not acceptance, but in general, you're trying to just have acceptance for all, and it still sounds like there could be some struggles between
Oh, for sure. I
between the
mean, I will
community.
say there has definitely been a shift away from the thinking of if A plus B is happening within you, then you must identify as this. Like, there's
Yeah.
not a lot of that thinking anymore. But at the same time, there's been a recent shift of like, oh, I'm going to find the term that aligns with me because I'm seeking a sense of belonging.
I see. Okay.
And that kind of gets tricky, especially for me. When I do my gender sexuality based therapy, I focus more on okay, if that's how you're defining yourself or if that's how you're identifying yourself, tell me your definition.
Sure.
Tell me
Yeah.
more about that. Don't just
Don't
tell
let me be the
me
one to tell you.
Right.
I want you to tell me.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like it because when you think about it, right? You can tell anyone that they're gay. You could tell anyone they're transgender. You could tell anyone they're non-binary. What does that matter? Really? Like just because you're non-binary, just because you're gay, it doesn't make a difference to me. Does it make an impact on my life? Not really. I'm your therapist. I'm
Right.
here to help you understand and get a better concrete understanding of who you are.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's your life. I'm just here kind of being on the side to
You're kind of the
keep you
navigator
there.
of where you
Exactly.
want them, where they
I'm
want
just,
to go,
I'm
where
just
they want to
keeping
be.
you where I'm just keeping you on track. Sure you don't fall off or anything like that.
Let me see. I was gonna ask the next question, but I feel like you also kind of
Tied into it.
because I was gonna say, what do you feel are some common misconceptions related to the LGBTQ community? I feel like you kind of did
that's-
elaborate on that,
so
but
it's
do you
kinda
have
like
more to add on
it's
to that?
twofolded, right?
Sure.
So externally, the whole idea that sex and gender are like one and the same when they're really not.
Sure.
But then internally, you kind of have to look at it from. So I kind of like to align it with the whole idea of the feminist movement, right?
Okay.
So wave of first feminism was right around the time where we were talking about women's suffrage first, like trying to get them the right to vote and stuff like that. And then the second wave of feminism, we talk more about like, okay, women need more than just the right to vote. Gloria Steinem and her wonderful work she did to get women's rights out the door. The argument of the third feminist movement being about more multiculturalism, like we can't just combine women together into one group. We need to be very culturally respected. The same idea kind of falls with the LGBT community. So, not that this is really a coined or like proven fact, but just to kind of give it a better framework in mind,
Okay.
we kind of look at it in waves too. So, we start all the way back in the 70s with Alfred Kinsey. He's really the father of sexuality because he came up with the idea of the Kinsey scale. He really helped individuals understand the differences between homosexuality versus heterosexuality.
Okay.
Now, that was where we started the conversation about sexuality. Then I would say the second wave of our community came when we introduced the incorporation of the T, right? So now we're not just talking about LGB, we're talking about LGBT to LGBTQ and so on and so forth. Like adding on the letters, the more common letters we're seeing now LGBTQI for our intersex individuals and A for those asexual individuals. Like that, I think is more of like our second wave of like acceptance and learning to work within our community.
Right.
So the more recent wave that I'm personally seeing and that I'm noticing is we're getting away from sexuality now. Like it seems like the whole concept of sexuality is understood, but gender is still such a weird taboo.
Yeah.
Not only just for those not identifying within the LGBTQ plus community, but also within LGBTQIA plus communities. Do we old school thinking versus new school thinking?
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Like old gays versus new gays. Like there's this whole debate about like, are you an old gay? Are you a new gay? Are you old trans? Are you new trans? Where were you at? I constantly have conversations with people. Those who were, during the times in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, you had the AIDS epidemic, you had Harvey Milk, you've had all these like massive things happening in life, and they paved the way for our younger generation to basically have a more accepting life. I would say in my time, I don't think we really made that acceptance point yet. We were kind of in that like
You were probably on the
transition of
you were. I
like,
was gonna say you're probably on the way up the hill type
yeah.
of.
So
Yeah.
like I do have my time fighting, but I was also at that cusp where like I could start pushing the envelope enough without having the fear of someone gonna jump me? Is someone
Yeah, you
gonna
might.
like do
Yeah.
this? Is someone gonna do that? Funny story actually. I went to the University of Scranton. I went there for my undergrad. I had a boyfriend at the time, and to this day, I still see this person. He works at the U, and he's like, I still remember you walking down the commons, coming down that the gigantic hill, and holding your boyfriend's hand. And he's like, that is the first time anyone has ever done that on that campus.
Really? Wow.
And the impact that I made really shifted the whole image and just changing the whole concept of what our community is all about.
And for you, it was just another day.
I was
I'm
just
with-
like, hey, I'm just
with,
gonna
with
hold
your
your
boyfriend.
hand.
We're holding hands.
I'm
We're
just
walking.
we're just gonna like
And
walk
just to
and
impact somebody just like that, that's awesome to hear, man.
Yeah.
That's great. That's really cool.
So again, shifts, a lot of different shifts right now.
How can we build an atmosphere of inclusion regardless of our personal or religious views?
That's actually a question that comes up a lot. We recently did a survey with the outpatient department asking. I had outpatient therapists ask anonymous questions about what they would like to know about the coming out process.
So and just to go back to what you were saying, not only did you talk with your coworkers, you also talk with the clients themselves.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So I actually am scheduled to talk to all of outpatient in July to go over the results of
That's
the
great.
survey.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest things that kind of stood out for me was they were talking about visibility. And I mean, to be honest with you, yeah, I don't disagree with them. Right? So my time and that transitional period, we had to be quiet. We had to be, under the radar. We had to kind of be a little hush hush about everything. Nowadays, like you have 5, 10-year-olds walking around with rainbows, no one like batting an eye at it, no
Right.
one like dare I say throwing a Bible at you or something like that. Like people coming out nowadays, it's like, okay. Whereas my time, it was, okay, I kind of knew before you. Or, what? Really? No, you can't be that. Like, it's such a shift, right? But now the community itself is looking for more visibility. They're not asking to be, going into the basement, like being hidden and like we need to do like speakeasy kind of things. Like they actually want true visibility. They want to know for a fact that this does exist. Devil's advocate, I get it. There is still that massive stigma. I think you and I can agree to that. There's
Sure.
always going to be stigma around,
Of course.
like people not understanding, people enforcing beliefs and values, which again, I have no problems with that. But I think we're also in a time period now where showing more visibility encourages more growth.
I would agree with you on that. Yeah, 100%. Not so much that you would have to put somebody up on the pedestal and say, "Hey, look at me," but
Right.
just you're side by side. There
Right.
doesn't have to be a up and down
Right.
or one of the versus the other.
It's
Yeah.
almost like we're going away from the concept of equity, so the access to having everything equal to one person to equality, where we're actually putting people on the same level. It definitely, like historically speaking, the LGBT movements have always been about equity, but lately there's less talk on equity and more about equality.
So I know you've kind of already talked about your clients and working with your clients, and but what are some things that you do to make your clients feel welcome and included?
So I think it's a lot of it has to do with just old school mentality. Like on my lanyards, I wear like all these different like pride pins and stuff like that. Not to go into too much detail about that, but there's like subcategories and sub like communities within the LGBTQIA plus community. So I kind of adapted the approach of just, kind of just putting it there, but not really outwardly putting it out there.
Sure.
To me, it makes no sense for me to self disclose. I come from the thinking of if you would like to know, it helps you to feel comfortable to ask those questions. To me, I'd rather be in the background about my gender and my sexuality to clients, because if they don't feel comfortable asking someone, then that tells me they're also not comfortable with
About themselves.
themselves.
Yeah.
And then it makes me think, what kind of internal conflicts, dialogues, confusions, things are happening here? So letting them kind of tell me what pace we want to go makes it easier.
I think it all kind of comes back a couple of times. You mentioned, Kenny, like it's like you're just there. You're
I'm
kind of
just, yeah.
putting the ball in their court to kind of, make the moves, and you're just the captain steering the ship.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing, so I'll never forget this. I was working, and I think I was talking to a coworker about this. And they made the comment of, you kind of just wear it on your sleeve. You wear your heart on your sleeve, but you also wear your gender and no, not gender, sexuality on your sleeve. And I'm just like, I'm not intentionally doing that. And like, do I still struggle with like, okay, am I being perceived, that rejection sensitivity there? And like, I need to be very cautious in how I present myself and stuff. Like, yeah, there are times I still deal with that. I think it's gotten better, and I've learned to accept that, yeah, like the concept of it's on your sleeve is there, but I think it's not about it being on my sleeve. I think it's just more so being true to who I am. And if I can how being true to who I am is so impactful, then maybe that can start encouraging some empathetic reactions and responses for more empathetic questions. And for the 11 years I've been doing this working in the field, I feel like for the clients that I did work with that do struggle with like these gender and sexuality issues, they feel more comfortable talking about this than immediately just thinking, oh, I'm going to someone who's LGBT specific. And that's another thing I want to point out too. I don't call myself an LGBTQIA plus therapist. The reason why is because as soon as I say that, it's like, let me throw anyone and
You feel
everyone.
like you've locked yourself into a box.
Correct.
Yeah.
And not for nothing, LGBTQIA plus therapy, to me, that makes no sense. Because then what am I really addressing? The fact that you're identifying different to what the stigma and the communal stereotypical thinking is? That's not my therapeutic approach.
Right.
My therapeutic approach is learning about who you are. And learning about who you are, at the core of it, is gender and sexuality. So that's why I always present myself as a gender sexuality based therapist, because I'm more concerned about your core than XYZ labels.
And I think that once again, it just plays back to what you said. You're talking about, wearing it on your sleeve, but in reality, it's just you're just being you.
I'm just being me.
You're just being you. You're just being open and honest and accepting to anybody that comes and sits down with you to wants to work with you.
Absolutely.
And it makes them feel more comfortable in turn. So it's really just being yourself, really what it comes down to.
And that's what, to me, that's what gender sexuality therapy is about. It's just honestly being the genuine self. Now, I will say, like, when you look at gender and sexuality therapies and like trainings and stuff like that, yes, is there a huge emphasis on definitions, understanding like common trends and things like that? Sure, but as a therapist, I don't believe in just pigeonholing yourself into one or two types of therapeutic models.
Here's the response that I should give you based off of the book and information that I have read, and here's what I'm going.
Yeah.
No, I'm just going to be me, and we're just
and
going to
like
talk
and
have
like the way I practice therapy, like I'll take a little bit from my EMDR training. I love doing DBT, but I especially love mindfulness and distress tolerance in DBT, so I'm going to incorporate that with a little bit of narrative therapy. You know, I do some artwork with my clients, so maybe it's artistic expression. One of my favorite activities I like to do with my clients is a sand tray. Now, me and sand.
What do you mean by sand tray?
So a sand tray is literally a box of sand.
Okay.
And then you have like little figurines, and we do it as like play therapy.
Oh, okay. I didn't know what you meant by sand.
Yeah.
Like,
So
okay.
it's a therapeutic like intervention that we use.
Okay.
Me and sand do not get along. So there is this wonderful thing called an online sand tray from Oaklander that I use all the time.
Okay.
And one of my favorite things I like to do, and you could totally steal this from me, is open the Oaklander sand tray, teach them about the sand tray, like how to use it and stuff like that. And the prompt I give them is, I want you to use the sand tray to show me you. And the pictures, the collages I get, it's just so, it's less invasive because I'm not directly coming to you and be like, tell me who you are.
It's once again putting the ball in their court
Right.
to express themselves in a different way.
And just finding different ways to express themselves. And then I can go to, you know, the therapeutic, tell me more about this.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this. Yeah. Okay. Keep going with that. Yeah. Just go with that. Keep going with that.
Keeping them engaged. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Yeah. I've never thought of doing it from that perspective, but when you put it in that perspective, it sounds like you're really just diversifying your ways to approach situations with any client, not just, you know, LGBTQ. I'm talking about just any client in general.
Well, I think it's important to note that for me, I'm not treating a diagnosis.
Right. Exactly.
I'm treating a human being.
Exactly.
If everyone had depression, then there would be one model to treat depression.
Yep.
I can't do that because my form of depression is going to be different from your form of depression.
Of course.
Just as it's going to be for Jane Doe, John Doe down there. So I'd rather meet you where you are than try to throw something at you that, yes, is evidence-based. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against evidence-based.
Sure,
But
sure.
I think there's something to be said about how we look at evidence-based, not statistically, quantitatively, putting a little bit more emphasis on qualitative and individualizing things.
Absolutely. No, I would agree with you. When you are doing sessions with your clients, do you involve family, friends, or partners in treatment? And if you do, how do you incorporate them?
So it all depends, right?
Okay, sure.
Like the short answer is it depends.
Sure.
I do specialize in family therapy. I did 2.5 years of ecosystemic structural family therapy, so the model they use for family-based.
Okay.
When I was in the
I
family-based...
can imagine that was an interesting time.
Yeah, when I was in the family-based world, I was spending more time with the parents while my co-lead was focusing more with the kids.
I gotcha. Okay.
So sequentially, I just did couples therapy. It's always about helping to break out of the thinking. So here's a really good example. I generally work with like 14 and up, but when I first started, I by accident was assigned a 8-year-old on my caseload. He's now 9. And the one thing that I always do with family therapy is you're thinking with your parent brain. And that's the conversation I'm having with the parents all the time. You're thinking like you're 40 something years old, 50 something years old, maybe 30 something years old. How old is your child?
Right.
So what is an 8-year-old thinking like? What is a 9-year-old thinking like? Now, let's tie this into gender and sexuality, right? How old is your child? How is a 12-year-old thinking? What were you thinking about when you were 12 years old?
Right.
So we need to get away from the hyper focused on like, oh my god, my child's different. Your child. It's your child.
Hmm.
Why should we focus on their exploration of gender and sexuality? That's one piece of the whole piece of your child. Just because that one piece is different, does that mean you lost the other pieces to your child? Like their personality or their characteristics, their traits, their hobbies, their strengths?
I think that's where it comes back into that stigma still.
Exactly.
Built around it. Yeah, absolutely. How should someone respond to heterosexual friends or coworkers who feel negatively about a person who is lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender?
The short answer is respect. That's basically what it comes down to. If this is how you feel, if this is your personal belief, I respect that. What's not okay is when you superimpose your personal feelings to make someone else believe something. And I think that's where we need to have a conversation about fine line between education versus self-imposing.
I agree.
Education is all about, just giving more knowledge, just helping someone understand. What's not okay is to superimpose and make them think like, okay, you need to do this from now on. Like, it's a conversation I have all the time with my LGBTQIA plus clients. I have coworkers who still misgender me. I have coworkers who still call me by my dead name. I have parents that refuse to call me by the name I'm choosing and still use it. And I just tell them like, you know, how long have you decided to make this change? How long have you decided to come out? You have to, to some degree, give credit that for XYZ years, that's what they're used to. And now all of a sudden you're making them change. Is this individual coming from a point of discrimination, or are they just coming from a point of bias? If it's discrimination, so true state, like factual intent, that's not okay. If you're coming from bias, which is basically everything that I've grown up to know, everything that I've been exposed to, everything that I've just learned throughout the time, but I'm not intentionally trying to force harm verbally, emotionally, physically to the individual. Right. Then you gotta give a little bit of credit to some people sometimes.
Sure.
And I think it's also important to just to the point of beating the drum. The more you keep repeating it, the more you keep saying it, eventually it will anchor in. But devil's advocate, yeah, does it get tiresome to beat the drum? I mean, I've been beating the drum now for so long. I get tired myself. But I also remind myself that there's so much that's different now. And there's so much that's changing. Like even myself, I can't even say like wholeheartedly I know everything about the LGBTQIA plus community 100%. I would say
it continues to expand and grow.
It's changing
and
and
becomes
everything.
Information and education for you still, after all these years.
Yeah, like there are times where I'm not gonna lie. There are times where I get new clients. They tell me I'm ba 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 ba, and I'm just like I feel like I'm back at kindergarten with the dunce hat, just sitting in a corner, like what just
are you talking about?
happened?
Yeah. So you still get presented with those problems
all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. But I think what benefits me is I don't look at the individual based off the definition.
Sure.
I put it back on them.
Yeah,
so that way I have a much better understanding of who I'm working with and not what the commonization, the stereotypical thing, and making those like prejudice mental connections. That's where I catch myself. So instead of immediately jumping into those prejudices and discriminations and stereotypes and stigmas, I just cut it off and just remind myself like I'm dealing with this person right now.
Of course. Kind of leading up to, I guess, my next question, because the first question that I just asked kind of segues into the next one. What would be the best way to handle homophobic and transphobic attitudes?
There's two schools of thinking. Let me say this. I think there's three schools of thinking. There's the passive answer. There's what I would consider more assertive answers. And then you have the more radical things. Radical would be, as my clients would have joked in my group, let's get pitchforks, let's get torches, let's throw them books and things like that.
How dare you have that opinion towards
Right.
me? Let's go out there and
Which, may I make a note? I, as a therapist, will not condone any form of violence towards.
we would never
like, any
assume
of that.
here on this
Like,
podcast that you are ensuing any of that or encouraging any of that.
Right, but does that
that's
exist?
what is some line of thinking, of
right.
course, is what
Why,
you're saying.
like, does that exist? Absolutely. Does it exist more than where we are today from the past? I think it's definitely died down a lot more.
Sure.
The passive way, which is, I kind of look back at when we had Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You don't need to talk to me. If you say something, I don't need to engage with you. I don't have to say anything. That's kind of two-folded, right?
Sure.
If you're talking to someone who has that stigma, if you're being passive about it, you're just re-encouraging their beliefs and you're just reinforcing their thoughts. But at the same time, you're also not being true to yourself because you're allowing someone or something to make judgments about who you are. But I mean, at the same time, to what extent do you need to constantly have that fight, right? Like,
Sure.
there's so many different ways. Now, the assertive answer, I like to call it flip the script. There used to be a video out in 2000, I want to say it was either 2003 or 2005, and it started because of GLAAD. It was either GLAAD or Gleason, one of the big national groups that focused on LGBT advocacy and support.
Okay.
It was Wanda Sykes and Hillary Duff. Both of them were in situations. Hillary Duff was in a clothing store. These two girls were looking at a dress and everything, and the girl's like to her girlfriend, "Hey, what do you think about this dress?" And the girlfriend's response was, "That is so gay." And Hillary Duff's response was, "Please don't say that." Like, it's just the same thing as saying, like, "Oh, that dress is like a basic white girl looking to spend money." I like Wanda Sykes one because they're in a restaurant. It's three guys, they're hanging around and stuff. And then they're looking at a picture on their phone and they're like, "Oh, that's so gay." She's like, "Don't say that." It'd just be saying, like, "Oh, there's your basic white guy who plays football."
Yeah.
And, like, really, like, let's be careful what we say. So, rewind the tape a little. Like, when I first came out, it wasn't so much a question of, like, okay, you're gay. It was more of a thing of, why are you so gay? Like, why are you just so this and so that? So I was trained to say the words, "Well, why are you so straight? Why are you so heterosexual? Why are you so into having love and connection and showing physical attraction to someone of the opposite sex? What's wrong with me doing it with someone of the same sex?" Right? I think the flipping of the script is a great way to catch someone off guard, but not enough to catch them off guard and make them go like, "Wow, I feel like an idiot. I need to run away right now." I think now, again, this is also dependent on the person, but having that dialogue to flip the script encourages conversation and encourages more education.
I agree.
Just be careful how you say it. Like, if someone's going to go, "Why are you so gay?" then reflect back in the way they're saying it. "Well, why are you so straight?" You're not going to go to someone and they say, "Why are you so gay?" and then you respond with, "Why are you so straight?" Right? Because then they're just looking at it as like, now here's a joke.
Yeah.
Let me just encourage it. You got to reflect one-to-one. But then once you do that one-to-one, the important thing is not to keep that momentum of maybe sarcasm or like
That also, I feel like could drag out into something a little more passive aggressive, I
Right.
guess you could say.
right. So it's still giving that one-to-one reflection, but then making sure you're staying in that assertive state of, helping to educate but not enforce.
It's a lighthearted way, I guess you could say,
Sure.
to educate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If someone wants advice on what to tell their roommates, friends, family about being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, what would you say is a good consideration?
I think it really comes down to the whole coming out process, to be honest with you. We need to understand the coming out is a very specific and unique process.
And different for everybody.
Absolutely different from everyone. So understanding our limitations, understanding to what extent I feel comfortable disclosing, and just also being cautious of if they're wanting to ask more clarifying questions, being aware that you don't have to always answer those, and just being comfortable with saying, I'm not comfortable with talking about this right now. I'm just here to inform you of something, and that's where I'm at right now.
How can people support without their own sexual orientation becoming an issue?
I think this is where we are putting too much emphasis on I identify as this, I identify as that. You know, just simplify. I constantly say this to everyone. All my advocacy work, all my research work, all of my therapies, it's just I'm this, right? Here's a really good example. I have this activity that I do with my clients that talks about intersectionality. So the different identities within ourselves, they make us who we are. So I give them a sheet. Page 1 says, I am at the top. And then it's a list of like 20 something questions. Name, date of birth, what is your age, what is your gender, what was your sex, what are your pronouns, what is your political choice, highest level of education, are you disabled, are you not disabled. Those are very like demographic
Sure.
questions that we normally get. How often do we get thrown paperwork that says name, date of birth, your age?
Yeah.
We need this information, maybe your insurance information, like what brings you in today and all that stuff, right? Because yes, it is important to have data, information and stuff like that. But to what extent are we using data to immediately label?
That bias.
It brings back that bias once again. So we have a reflection over it. We have a discussion over how does it feel to know that yes, this information is important, but it does create bias. So then I give them another sheet and it just says I am at the top. And it's a blank sheet. This is what we call developing your mission statement. This is your personalized individual dialogue message that you develop for yourself and how you want to present yourself. I've developed one, but I also have different ones. Like I have one for when I'm a counselor. I have one for when I'm out in my community being an activist. I have one when I'm just being with my friends. I have one for my boyfriend when we have these wonderful conversations, making new relationships. Like I have different scripts for all of these. But the important thing is, highlighting and understanding like this is my dialogue. This is me. And this is how I want to tell someone else. And whether or not they choose to understand or respect that is on them. Because I at least have the respect for myself to say, this is me.
I like that answer. The last question I have for you, Kenny, and this is a great conversation. I thank you so much for coming and chatting with me. Is there anything you wish people knew more about when it comes to LGBTQ?
I wish people understood that nothing is black and white with us. There's nothing black and white about us. We're loving, we're a community that gives and always will open the door to anyone. But I also think it's important to understand that just because we are finding a sense of community, just like any other community, we also have our struggles in conflicts, in prejudices, in biases within our communities. So just because we are as an open community and we really express that, there are some other things underneath those layers too that you don't see. So just be cautious about when you say LGBT community accepts everyone, because while that's generally true, there's always going to be bias, there's always going to be prejudice, there's always going to be discrimination, both internally and externally.
I think that that's a great explanation and a great way to end it. Kenny, thank you so much for coming to hang with me. I appreciate that. It's a fantastic conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to hit the thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe.